Hello everyone, I'm Andrew David, I'm Editor-at-Large at Elemental, and I'm delighted to introduce the first of this week's webinars, focusing on the important area of district heating. My mouse just died then, which is very awkward when I'm reading a script. Here we go. Many people believe that district heating is an underexploited element in the lower carbon heat armoury, and at the same time probably the least well understood. This webinar is designed to change all that, and I'm delighted that we have as our panelists the folk whose job it is to promote heat networks and also to provide the funding for projects too. They'll be explaining the scope of the government's heat network transformation programme and the opportunities around the two key funding schemes, Green Heat Network Fund and the Heat Network Efficiency Project. And I think the Energy Act will probably come into the conversation too. So I'm going to introduce them and then I will let them do the talking. So please welcome Alex Trebovich, who's Interim Head of Capital Schemes for Heat Networks at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Samantha Shea, Head of Policy Insight and Engagement at Low Carbon at GenServe. Sam Hales, Low Carbon Consultant at GenServe. We'll be telling us about heat network efficiency later. We will, of course, be allowing time for audience interaction, so please do put a short and succinct question to any of the speakers in the Q&A section. We'll try to get as many through as we can. And we're going to begin with Alex, who's going to talk to us about the Heat Network Transformation Programme and how it fits in with the decarbonisation challenge. So I'm going to just give me 3 seconds to change the slides over, Alex, and then we will be fine. Right, this should now appear. Have a look. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay? Just checking.
Yeah, that's good.
Fantastic. Morning. So my name is Alex Trebovich, and as Andrew said, I'm the Head of Capital Schemes for Heat Networks at DESNZ, which covers several of the projects that I'll be talking about shortly, and that Sam and Samantha will cover later on in the presentation as well. So just to kick off then, when we're talking about heat networks, what we mean is energy infrastructure that generates heat, power, or indeed cooling centrally and transports that to where it's needed, usually commercial, residential buildings. And that can be through district heating networks or through communal heating networks. So our wider work supports both of those scenarios. In terms of why heat networks, so the kind of overarching kind of rationale for supporting these projects is to make a material contribution to our net zero targets by 2050 and deliver emissions reductions. And we know that progress has been made in the power and transport sectors, but heat, and particularly heat in buildings, still represents a very significant challenge for decarbonisation. However, we know that all the kind of currently understood decarbonisation pathways, whether that's hydrogen or electrification, includes heat networks, excuse me, as a significant contributor to that decarbonisation challenge. And in terms of outlining the kind of headlines as to why, so firstly on scale, so we know that heat networks could provide 20% or more of the total heat demand by 2050, and that's up from about 2 to 3% of current heat demand that's provided by heat networks, and that requires a lot of work and a lot of investment. So we think about 60 to 80 billion pounds of investment between now and 2050, which will need very close public and private sector collaboration. We think it's the biggest district heating investment opportunity in Europe currently. And then in terms of the projects themselves, so we know that heat networks have a very clear role in accessing waste or recovered heat, and that's accessible at a scale that's just not available at individual building level. So there's lots of heat to be captured and reused there, and that kind of helps us move away further from dependence on fossil fuels. And lastly, system benefits. So we know that heat networks can help to reduce grid reinforcement costs and also offset peak demands through storage. So that summarises our kind of case for why heat networks. Andrew, if you could just move on to the second slide, please. So in terms of outlining that challenge, this slide just illustrates the heat network transformation programme, and this is our kind of overarching programme of works that brings together various policies and projects that support the heat network market into the mid-2020s and beyond. So in terms of just breaking this down a little bit, that first group at the top, the kind of three green lines, broadly cover policy and regulation. So by that, we essentially mean regulating heat networks as a sector. It's currently an unregulated market, but that's changing very soon. And also heat network zoning. So I think as Andrew trailed at the beginning, what was the Energy Bill is now the Energy Act 2023 has passed into law, and that gives us powers to regulate the heat network sector and also appoint Ofgem as that regulator. And that regulatory framework covers many things, but primarily it covers pricing, carbon, service standards, and technical standards for heat networks. The other part of the Energy Act, which is critical to our work, is around heat network zoning. So the Act gives us statutory powers for delivering heat network zoning. So broadly speaking, that's identifying and designating heat network zones and developing heat network projects in those zones, and also mandating connections where heat networks are the lowest cost and lowest carbon option. Just to flag as well, we ran a consultation recently seeking views on consumer protection requirements and also something around the structure of regulation. That consultation is now closed, and we'll be looking to respond to that formally in early 2024. And also in terms of a forward look, there will be a consultation on zoning forthcoming, so please do look out for that and contribute where you can. So that kind of broadly covers the policy and regulation side. In terms of that second group, so the blue and pink lines, these are our kind of capital support schemes. So taking those in turn, the blue line is the heat network investment project, which is now closed. But that was our initial capital support scheme for delivering large-scale district heating projects. And that's now closed, like I've said, and has been replaced by the Green Heat Network Fund. So the Heat Network Investment Project also deployed about £250 million across 30 or so projects, and those are in the main moving now into operation and hopefully expansion. Our current kind of flagship capital support scheme is the Green Heat Network Fund, and that has a focus firmly on building new low carbon heat networks, so moving away from fossil fuel based systems, particularly gas and CHP. And that opened in March 2022 with a budget of 288 million, and that was intended to run until 2025, but due to demand, additional capital funding will be allocated over a longer period, and we'll provide details of that in due course. And then also we have for operational or existing district heating and communal networks, we have the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. So the focus of that is very much on improving the operational performance of poor performing heat networks, and increasingly importantly, helping to address customer detriment in networks, whether that's high heat tariffs, overheating, or service interruptions, or others. And that scheme currently has a budget of 32 million out until 2025, and is in the fourth funding round. So Samantha and Sam will cover those last two schemes in a bit more detail later on in the webinar. The other things just to mention are revenue schemes. So our Heat Network Skills Programme, where we've recently launched a heat training grant, providing trainees with discounts or rebates of £500 for training. And we expect that to support about 4,000 individuals over the next 2 years. And all of that work, capital and revenue, is underpinned by our heat network delivery unit. So that's a team of technical, commercial, and other specialists that provide guidance and grant funding to those developing heat network projects. So mainly local authorities, but we also support some private sector projects through that as well. So that's all I had to say on that, Andrew. I think that covers my slides. So hand back to you for the next lot, or any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. I think what we'll do is we'll go through with the information piece and continue with the two Sams, and then we'll roll some questions in for all of you. You can all pitch in at the end. So Sam number one, Samantha, you're going to tell us about the first pot of funds that's available.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Samantha Shea. I work for a company called GemServe, and we are part of the delivery partner team that delivers the Green Heat Network Fund on behalf of the department. My role specifically is overseeing the communication, stakeholder engagement, and overseeing the support that we provide to applicants throughout their application journey, and the system that we've built to enable that. So as Alex has said, the Green Heat Network Fund is currently a live opportunity for people looking to build out heat networks. It was launched last year, and it supports the commercialisation and construction of new networks, but also the expansion of existing district heating schemes. And it enables operators to transition to low carbon heating technologies, because we know that there are a few legacy systems out there that are still using fossil fuel systems, which can be inefficient, in some cases pretty old, and obviously contribute towards carbon emissions. The scheme's currently in its seventh funding round, and it's open to private, public and third sector organisations. These organisations have to be within England, as the heat networks themselves are within England. There are other schemes available elsewhere. The programme itself has proven really, really popular. In fact, last week we announced £65 million being awarded. Sorry, £65 million being awarded to 5 projects, and we hope to be able to announce further funding awards, hopefully this side of Christmas, if not early January. The projects themselves will provide low carbon heating to thousands of homes and businesses, and utilise a range of different heat sources. I think one of the great things about GHNF is seeing the variety of projects that come through, and the real impact that the funding is having on consumers from a reduced energy bill perspective, but also on the environment from a reduced carbon emissions perspective. One thing I wanted to touch on, which isn't specifically GHNF, but works alongside it, is a funding framework which we launched in collaboration with the department, called Beehive. And the framework is an ETS framework which allows public sector organisations to access private sector investments into their heat networks. So that framework's open, and we've had lots of interest from the private sector, with a good number of them already onboarded and looking to invest in schemes. So if you have an existing network and you're looking to refinance it, or would like to draw in private capital, then get in touch and we can look to see whether the framework's suitable for you.
This is effectively a matchmaking scheme for private funding, is that, just to clarify?
Sort of, yeah. So it allows, it's a framework that allows public sector organisations to publicise an opportunity for investment, and then the funders that are on the framework can then submit a tender to support those projects. Thanks. And I guess just to finish off, just to highlight, we've got a team of experts that can work with you throughout your application journey. So as I say, we're in the 7th funding round, which closes in the new year. We have a team of relationship managers who will work with you every step throughout the journey, helping you understand the application process itself, and help you answer any questions that you might have about the guidance. Our technical assessment team review every application that comes through. We've got a strict set of criteria that we're marking applications against. The rounds are competitive, so it's worth bearing in mind that any of the sort of maximum criteria within the guidance shouldn't be targets. You should be looking to exceed those and score better than your competitors within those rounds. We also look at the deliverability of the schemes that come through to us, to make sure that we're funding schemes that are going to go ahead. And we look at wider benefits. So we look at things like job creation, bill savings, supply chain benefits, and all of the projects that come through to us have to sign up to a series of market transformation commitments. And these cover infrastructure, innovation, and skills. Got a separate bit of guidance on that specifically, but these commitments aim to encourage best practice, transparency, to support the industry to grow and achieve the ambitious targets that Alex mentioned at the beginning. So that's everything from me. Thanks,
Sam. Okay, so we'll now move over. So that was the new schemes and the expanding schemes. Very important new piece of funding is for the existing district heating schemes. So Sam number 2 is going to tackle that, and you've got a slide to put up, which I'm just going to click on to now.
Yeah, I'll say if we put that up as I go along, I'll do a bit of an introduction, then we can move on to the slide if that's all right, Andrew. My name is Sam Hales, a low carbon consultant at GemServe, and I'm currently here talking about the heat network efficiency scheme. So in the heat network scheme, I look after the application support and relationship management, and the general sort of assessment of projects. So in terms of the scheme, it is obviously the department scheme, and then it is delivered by ourselves at GemServe along with our technical assessors, Ramble, and our relationship managers at Turner and Townsend. And then, as Alex was saying earlier in the introduction, the aims of this scheme are for existing heat networks to reduce carbon emissions by making the networks more efficient, reducing customer detriment and improving customer confidence, as well as helping the heat network market prepare for the upcoming regulation and technical standards. So we have 2 pots of funding to help deliver this, capital and revenue. So revenue studies can be 100% fully funded by the scheme, and they allow for heat network owners and operators to get a optimisation study by consultants to go out, have a look at the network and work out what could be inefficient in it and how to improve it. And then this leads on to capital grants, which are up to but not including 50% funded, and these allow for the projects to implement those suggestions basically. So you don't have to do a revenue grant before a capital grant. You can go straight in with a capital application if you already have that supporting evidence to say what's wrong with the heat network and what you can do to improve it. But if you don't know where you're starting, it's quite a nice journey to do the revenue one first to identify the issues in the network, and then the capital one to implement the fixes and the changes. So on screen, we've got a couple of examples from the demonstrator. So we ran a demonstrator before the main scheme, which is launched now. So we've got Hackney Council that received funding to undertake 2 optimisation studies. So these are the revenue grants, and they looked at what the inefficiencies within those networks, and identified across the two networks 18 efficiency measures, which, if implemented, would save £3,000 and 676 tonnes of carbon emissions over a 20-year period. And as it says there, they now intend to implement the measures and have secured H&S capital funding in the first round. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, we've got Notting Hill Genesis, who received £310,000 from a demonstrator. And this was capital funding, and as it says there, they have 139 residential connections on this heat network, a hospital and a church, and it suffered from high flow rates and return rates, especially around peak hours. So as it says on the slide, there were three main areas of improvements that were identified, with poor heat interface unit performance found in 50% of dwellings, and poor water quality, alongside a complex design and inadequate controls. So they implemented these changes, or implemented solutions to fix these issues, and managed to reduce their gas consumption by 32% on the network, saving just over £27,000 of cost savings a year. So that was results obviously in lower gas bills, and therefore they were able to pass these cost savings on to the residents, as well as obviously having lower emissions from the heat network in general. So moving on from that slide, who can apply to the scheme? It is, as I said, you need to be sort of the owner-operators of the scheme, of the heat network. The heat network can be situated in England and Wales, and it's public sector, private sector, or third sector organisations can apply. So, as Alex alluded to at the start, we are currently in round 4 of the scheme. Round 5 is due to close at the end, or is closing at the end of this week. And then we have round 6, 7, and 8 still open, and they will close in February, March, and May. The exact dates are all obviously within our guidance that you can find on the government's webpage. So in terms of what we've announced so far, we've announced that we've funded £13.9 million of projects in the first round of HNES. So examples of works that were included in these are upgrading pipework, improving insulation efficiency, updating controls, replacing heat interface units, improving water quality, as well as reducing leaks. And so they're sort of the main things that we've been funding in round 1, alongside obviously the optimisation studies. So if you have any further sort of questions on the scheme, you can always reach out to us on HNES, which is hanes@gemserve.com, or, as I said earlier, we've got a guidance document on the department's website, and also on the GemServe website. So I'll pass back to Andrew.
Thank you, Sam. I'll now hide your slides. There seems to be a bit of a time lag there between hiding the slides. Well done, you folk, because you've rattled through your information. So now we get to the discussion stage. I've now got to click out another screen. Let's talk in general about heat networks and the opportunity. So, Alex, you're an engineer. So, from your perspective, this is a massive low carbon opportunity, isn't it? For not just for heating, but for the whole country.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're talking about an energy infrastructure here. So we're talking about projects that have a very long lifespan. Certainly the kind of delivery infrastructure in terms of the pipework in the ground we're talking about technologies that are kind of proven and available now. So we're not talking necessarily about systems which don't have, lots and lots of precedent, increasingly in this country, but across Europe and the world as well. And as I mentioned, touching on a few of those kind of benefits, particularly the sort of capture of waste or recovered heat is a really strong opportunity to, develop some increasing kind of self-sufficiency in terms of where our energy supplies come from, and also decarbonise at the same time. I think across all those different kind of pathways, as I mentioned before, we're very confident that heat networks have a really key role to play and can capture and sort of provide a really significant baseline of the heat demand going forward.
Do you agree with my opening statement that it's sort of the overlooked, is the bridesmaid of the low carbon sector? You look in the national papers at the moment, everyone's talking about heat pumps on the patio. Seems to have captured the public imagination for good reasons and bad. But there's a lot of potential carbon reduction from heat networks. But I guess because it's a little bit more complicated, a bit more difficult to explain to your average broadsheet journalist, it's not quite got the publicity. Do you agree with that? And what can we do about it?
Well, I think any kind of market that's sort of nascent and developing will experience similar issues, I think, and certainly we as government have a very key role to play in both kind of communicating with the wider public and our stakeholders in the market, and also to deliver the work that we're doing to build that kind of baseline of projects, show investors and people who want to enter the market, of the wider opportunity, and use that as the kind of platform from which we can then, engage with contractors, supply chain, and so on to roll this out. I think it is probably fair to say that although we would consider heat networks and heat pumps, as I said, as kind of robust and kind of available and kind of ready technologies, certainly when you're talking about delivering heat pumps at an individual building level, there is a lot less complexity in terms of the scale of the works. We're talking heat network projects here that are 20, 30, 40 million pounds, which are complex by design. But the benefits are equally kind of large proportionally. So I think there's a lot of truth in kind of what you've outlined. And again, it's kind of our role to make sure that the investor market has certainty and that we're doing all we can to grow the market going forward.
Thanks.
Can I just add to that a little bit, Andrew?
You can.
Okay. Just a reflection, I guess. I started working on the heat network funding programs when the heat network investment project was launched. So back in 2017. At the very beginning, we had to describe to everybody that we were speaking to what a heat network was. I had a standard paragraph that I included in absolutely every communications that went out. And now it's definitely better understood, and awareness of the solution is much greater across the UK. So I think we sort of won that battle. It's more about growing the market now to the place where it needs to be. But I just think it's just quite interesting to see over the last sort of 5 years or so that shift where there's awareness within local authorities, there's awareness within social housing providers, the private finance sector understand heat networks and are keen to invest and build out a portfolio of projects that support local regeneration and decarbonisation objectives.
It raises a useful point, actually, Sam, in that there's often a debate certainly we have a debate internally. I'm sure you've had it yourselves as to whether we refer to heat networks or district heating. The problem, of course, with calling it district heating is everybody thinks it's got to be a vast scheme. But yeah, is there a minimum to the size of the network that can apply for funding?
So there is a minimum from a GHNF perspective. So it's 2 gigawatt hours of heat annually. So they're pretty big schemes coming through to GHNF. I'd refer to those, and Alex may correct, but I'd refer to those as district heating schemes. Heat networks, in my eyes, cover both communal and district heating. So communal networks being sort of single blocks where there's a centralised boiler potentially in a basement. Quite often we see these in sort of social housing developments or new build developments. And then district heating is sort of larger scale, but the terms are fairly interchangeable and are used in both ways.
Yeah, but I noticed that district heating doesn't appear in any of the scheme names anymore, so that's obviously a deliberate decision. Alex, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember I think it's something like 14,000 heat networks in the UK, of which I think about 2,000 or 2.5 are the larger district heat networks. So, you know, we're conscious that if we just focus on the larger scale stuff, you know, we're missing out a lot of projects, a lot of customers, and a lot of heat demand. So I think, yeah, just reflecting back on all of that, you know, from our perspective, we very much include kind of communal heat networks in the kind of wider kind of heat transformation program lens. Yes, GHNF tends to focus on the larger scale schemes, but there is also an approach by which you can aggregate sort of smaller projects, and as long as the kind of total is kind of 2 gigawatt hours or over, you know, that's a route for smaller projects to access that. I think, again, coming back to your earlier question, Andrew, about sort of the kind of visibility of heat networks generally, you know, we're also aware that of those smaller kind of communal schemes, there are still a lot of projects out there that, for various reasons, aren't performing, you know, as we'd like them to, and in some instances nowhere near as well as we'd like to. So I think, again, through the heat network efficiency scheme and kind of through regulation and kind of other policy initiatives, we're very keen to support that side of the market and make sure that, you know, all that good work we're doing over here on new low carbon large scale isn't kind of undermined by a kind of perception that, you know, heat networks are somewhat, you know, intrinsically kind of complex on the customer side, because we know through various surveys that that's typically not the case, but that there are, you know, projects that need support. So yeah, just wanted to make that point as well.
It's probably worth saying, from obviously GHNF, as you said, focus on those larger ones. HNES focus on both the communal ones, so as Sam said, might be the boiler in the basement, and then up to all the flats above, as well as district. It does cover both. It's not just larger only.
Thanks, Sam. A couple of questions have come in while we spoke. We'll start with the controversial one. Might be one for you, Alex. Has funding been given to optimise networks via HNES, which were originally designed under previous funding? Questioner says, arguably, this could be seen as a waste of taxpayers' money if systems were not designed correctly in the first place with taxpayers' money. So we've got a little bit political without from the sideways in, but yeah, are there any controls on those schemes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Andrew. So I guess you know, from a kind of scheme design and a kind of government accounting perspective, we have very clear kind of subsidy control rules that we can't fund, you know, the same thing in the same project from different areas. So across all of our schemes, yeah, we have those controls in place to make sure we're not double funding. I think what we can say is that we have supported projects where a connection to a district heating scheme, what wants to connect but is existing, not performing very well. So there's not very much incentive for the operator to want to connect that. Say a communal block, for example. So we have provided funding to schemes where a kind of communal poor performing block, the works for which sit outside of the main sort of district heating network, has secured funding to optimise their performance, to then be able to connect to that larger district heating network, and that's kind of benefit to both the customers on that communal network, which will hopefully be getting a better service provision, hopefully in terms of tariff, in terms of service interruptions, in terms of information provision and so on. But also to the network operator, who, without sort of getting too technical, will be receiving heat back from that network at a much lower temperature than it's sending out to, which is beneficial for both sides. So yeah, definitely that scenario we've seen. But again, we've got very clear kind of red lines around subsidy control, which we test across both schemes.
And I guess that the majority of the schemes that are being applied for HNES are older schemes anyway, and probably pre-existed before the funding rounds were all there, and all those parameters were applied. So you sort of HNES is to really to bring the old, is in general to bring the older schemes up to speed, or the early schemes up to speed.
Yeah, I mean it's a sort of a demand-led scheme, so we do tend to see a kind of mix across applicant types in terms of project types. We see mainly sort of fossil fuel based schemes, one or two kind of biomass or kind of heat pump schemes. But in terms of the kind of age specifically, again, it's kind of a mix. So we see a lot of, like you said, older kind of social housing or local authority projects where they've been around for 50, 60 years and everything's just kind of falling over, through to sort of newer networks where perhaps they've been sort of 10, 15 years ago, they sort of pushed through planning. There's been issues in terms of sort of design and possibly commissioning, and the project's at the point where there's an opportunity to address some of those things. And I think my sort of background's in sort of more general engineering consultancy, and I would say that those kind of issues in terms of newer projects with sort of design and that sort of stuff is more of a sort of an HVAC or an M&E issue than necessarily heat networks specifically. I think there is a difference in terms of, again, sort of how mature the market is, for M&E generally versus heat networks. So absolutely, that's a factor. But yeah, we kind of hope through the scheme that we can move, the bottom end of the market, upwards in terms of performance. So yeah, certainly we do like to focus on those kind of older, really poor performing projects through HNES.
I guess this is yes. Go on.
Just to add to that, I mentioned that we've got relationship managers as part of the Green Heat Network Fund, and the same for the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. And their role is to really understand the projects that are coming through to us before an application is made, and through those conversations, they might be able to identify whether HNES is a more suitable route for the scheme to go through initially, if there's a need to improve the network before coming through to GHNF. So the two schemes sort of work together, as well as two separate funding pots. So we work with applicants to understand which scheme is most appropriate for them.
I was going to ask, you anticipated me coming to you, because I was going to ask a couple of questions about the process, really, because I'm guessing there'll be people on the call who think that there's something that should be available for funding, but are not sure. So you're saying that the process allows your relationship managers to have a sort of if you like, a consultation to see whether what it fits into and how you can proceed?
Yeah, so we have some projects that come through and they will just submit an application and they don't really engage with us prior to submission, but that's quite uncommon. So we try and encourage any applicants to come through to us to discuss their project. It'll help identify whether there's any eligibility challenges associated with the project, and help us understand which funding round might be best for them to apply to. So, for example, we don't want projects coming through that are very underdeveloped, that wouldn't score particularly well. So we might want to advise that the project takes a little bit more time to build the evidence base required before they apply. So we really like to have those one-to-one conversations to understand the scope of the project and potentially some of the challenges that they might face. It also helps us build out a pipeline of projects and understand where we might be trying to draw down funding.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, Andrew, if I may. So, from our perspective, what we're sort of aiming for almost here is that when projects submit applications to us across either scheme, that we're confident that they will be a quality application and will score well, and we're not wasting applicants' time in terms of not having that engagement before the application takes place. And it's also important to say that function is very separate from the kind of assessment side over here. So it's not like the relationship managers are assessing the same applications. It's a very different kind of function across the delivery partner teams on both schemes. But yeah, the aim is to make sure that we when the applications do land, we have quality applications that we're really interested in funding.
Is there such a thing as a reason why applications don't pass through? Is there a common reason? Is there something that you can tell the audience that is sort of by way of tips for applications?
I would say from HNES, it might be again that not having quite enough information in the application or supporting evidence. So we've got a list of supporting evidence, things like that that we require to assess the applications, and for instance, some might not have quotes or things like that. And part of obviously the assessment is we need to make sure the costs that you're applying for are suitable. So it's that supporting evidence, that information. On HNES, as we said, some of the projects are going to be quite old, so we are aware that they won't have maybe all the metrics, which is fine. Projects can put in, again, this is where it's really good to talk to the relationship managers, but they can put in applications and not have all the metrics there, but obviously we can't score them if the metrics aren't there. So it's the more information we get, the better. And I'd say proof for HNES is that maybe projects coming through before they finish collecting data that they could collect, that could be a reason, or they haven't provided enough supporting evidence to go alongside it. So yeah, that relationship manager sort of function I think is quite important from HNES to make sure that you've built enough information up.
And I'd say it's similar from a GHNF perspective. Projects coming through that aren't quite ready or aren't able to provide the evidence base that we require. We do occasionally get speculative applications from people that don't meet the eligibility criteria, and as Alex was saying, that can sometimes be a waste of time and effort from an applicant perspective if they come through for a scheme that doesn't quite meet the eligibility. For example, a scheme that's too small, doesn't happen very often, or a scheme that doesn't deliver the benefits that we're looking for, carbon savings, for example.
And my plug here would be, two things. One, please read the guidance, because we're still amazed at how many stakeholders we engage with that are almost at the point of submitting, but actually haven't properly read the guidance. So that's one. Please read the guidance. We've tried to make it as straightforward to understand as possible. And secondly, yeah, again, just to plug, engage with those relationship managers, because the point is to support applicants to get to a stage where they've got a quality application. So yeah, I would definitely plug that. I mean, I'm not aware if we've sort of looked at what that kind of means in terms of successful applications, but I think we can objectively say that it's helpful for both sides to engage on that basis. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we should address that. One of the common refrains when we talk about heat networks is, sharp intake of breath, complicated, and planning regulations comes up, and difficult to get all the parties together. But I guess the fact is you've got quite a good number of successfully funded projects to prove that if you put the work in the right place, that there's money available. That's for you, Alex. Sorry, or either of you.
Definitely. They are complex. They require inputs from a range of different stakeholders and different disciplines. So you need legal advice. You need technical support. You probably need to engage the planning department, as you're saying. So they tend to involve quite big teams to develop these networks, but like you say, there's loads of fantastic case studies out there. I'll ping a link to our case study brochure that we published recently, which provides a bit of an update on some of the schemes that were funded through the Heat Networks investment project. Might be useful.
That'd be good. I was going to say that it's the testimonials of people who've gone through the process that I think are useful. As to point the way. This may be an impossible question, so forgive me, Alex, but do you think that the existence of the funding pots is causing a sort of a change, causing people to think, whereas they had a previous technology in mind to address their projects, that they're now thinking in terms of heat networks as a as a route ahead? Is it sort of changing I guess what I'm aiming at, changing the dynamic of low carbon heating and energy a little bit?
That's a very good question, Andrew. I think we can definitely say that the change in dynamic is obvious from HNIP to GHNF in terms of the kind of quote unquote low carbon nature of heat network projects. And also possibly the scale of projects. I think kind of more generally, certainly heat networks and maybe sort of, generally sort of building level M&E to a certain extent has a fairly lengthy kind of development time. So I don't know if we're sort of far enough into our kind of funding streams to make such kind of broad kind of observations on the market. It kind of feels like those kind of key design decisions of individual heat pump versus heat network connection tend to be made quite early on in the sort of general design process. I think where that will change going forward is across heat network zoning, right. Where a lot of that kind of demand risk, i.e. difficulty in securing demand from what could be a range of different buildings and consumer types, moves towards a sort of a mandated connection model. Whereas if certain criteria or things are met, then that building will connect. Obviously there'll be sort of ways in which that doesn't have to happen if there's an alternative and so on. But I think that's going to be the sort of step change in the market in terms of both from the kind of heat network kind of developer and operator side and also the customer side. And I think again, just sort of touching on the previous conversation, I think increasingly sort of economically and financially, heat network projects are absolutely, making more and more sense now, particularly where, the alternative, what would you do if you didn't connect to a heat network? which has traditionally been, I'll put a gas boiler in. That is going to flip as well to, well, actually you have to look at low carbon technology going forward. So that kind of rationale and justification for these projects will also sort of increase on that economic basis. So I think it's probably too early to say for these schemes, but I think increasingly we will see that going forward in terms of that kind of momentum.
Yeah, sorry, Alex. I'm a typical journalist, always looking for a trend, possibly before one's been fully identified.
That's okay. We'd love to see one as well, to be honest, Andrew. So.
But I think in an engineering sense, these are exciting times, I think, and it is a sort of challenge to the culture, isn't it? Because the heating industry, I know it's difficult to talk about it in one single sense, but the heating industry is tending to look at buildings and how to heat a building, and this is encouraging people to think bigger in many ways, and the whole arena of taking waste heat from various sources is proving it's challenging the minds of the country, which has got to be a good thing. I'm getting all sort of excitable on behalf of engineering now. But some of those projects that have already been successful, I think, are raising the bar for sort of engineering in many ways. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two sides to this. One is that the actual technology is in the most part not really that different to anything that engineers work with. It's boilers, heat pumps, and kind of heat interface units. Obviously, there's a lot we still need to develop in terms of sort of standardizing and understanding that construction, commissioning, and especially the operation and maintenance side. You can design and construct and commission a network beautifully, but if it's not operated and managed correctly, including stuff like water quality, which often gets overlooked, projects do, the performance sort of tends downwards over time. And I guess the other thing I'd add is, I've kind of made some statements around, the kind of uplift in heat demands to 2050, the investment opportunities as well. We need to make sure, and we're starting to do quite a bit of work on this now, on sort of addressing the kind of skills and the people challenge, to make sure there's enough engineers that can actually, deliver all this investment and all this good stuff that we want to deliver. So I think that is also, not shying away, that's a critical challenge as well, and one that's necessary to sort of underpin all this other work that's going on.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion around how the skills differ from, again, what we used to view as traditional heating, traditional M&E. You have your energy companies, and it's a crossover, isn't it? And it probably needs collaboration. We had a debate like this about existing heat networks at the show in the summer, and I think when I did my roundup question, which you'll be getting soon, which is sort of what's the one takeaway, it was we need to get the skills right to keep them maintained and operated, because we don't want to be back in that situation where we've got existing inefficient networks. I don't know whether that comes within your scope in your department or whether your colleagues have a say in that, but I think that skills area is going to be a key one.
Yeah, we absolutely do have colleagues that work in our market growth team that are focused on skills. The flip side to what I mentioned earlier around, it's just sort of pumps, pipes, and heat generation equipment. Is that there are also some very sort of specialist skill sets in there that are heat network specific, that need to be kind of understood, rolled out, so the market has confidence in what we are delivering or want to deliver. Absolutely agree with you. It's a key it's a key area, and hopefully we can update on further work in that space in future.
In due course, brilliant. We're getting near the end of our hour, but as is often the case, the questions start coming in right at the end. There's one that I wanted to get into the discussion, which it's a useful one because it's about supply chains. A very specific question, but it turns into a large question. Generally, are the pipe systems pre-insulated plastic or steel? That's the first part, and then the second part is how does one become part of a heat network supply chain? It's the sort of question that I guess, if you're a part of that supply chain and you see that you could be of value, how do you get involved? I don't know. So, Alex, are you going to answer the specific question, and then Sam take on the how you get involved, or I don't know how you want to answer it. 2 parts.
On the second one, how do you get involved? Please get in touch, and I can direct you to someone who can have a much more sensible conversation on that than myself. Again, our kind of market growth team supports those kind of conversations, and how new entrants, whether from the UK or from abroad, kind of come into our market. And then on the specific one, I guess it's a mix. It depends on various sort of design decisions. I think generally, pre-insulated steel pipe work can operate at higher pressures, higher temperatures, so it can support larger district scale networks. But there's absolutely also a place for sort of pre-insulated plastic pipe. So yeah, I'd say it's a mix across the supply chain.
Okay, I'm looking. What I should have said at the outset is that I keep looking to my right because when I have a long question, I have to look on my big screen, and I'm just digesting the question, which is the feeling is that a lot of these heat network systems are being designed by consultancies. Do they have the competence for the job, and are they? I guess, are they subjected to the parameters as well? And the questioner has, again, slightly contentiously said, have they got all their experience from using gas plant, and now they're trying to apply it across into non-fossil fuel plant? So I don't know how you want to answer that. How do the consultancies fit into the picture, I guess, is the summary of that question. Sam, do you want to take that? Yeah, Alex is definitely leaving it to you.
You go first, Sam.
Great. So a lot of the projects that come forward across both of the schemes use consultancies. A lot of the organisations that own or operate these schemes, be those local authorities, social housing providers, or private sector, don't necessarily have the expertise in-house to develop these schemes. As we've said throughout the session today, they're pretty complex, and they require lots of different disciplines to come together. So going to a consultancy can be a really good option for a lot of organisations. In terms of the skills, there are lots of very competent and highly skilled consultants and consultancies out there, and specialists that can advise on projects. I sent a link to the skills training, so if anybody feels like they would like to upskill, there is heat network training available for people to enter the market, or upskill if they're not as confident as they think they should be. But we work with a range of different engineering consultancies, finance, legal, commercial specialists that are working with projects up and down the country. Alex, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything.
I agree with everything you've said, Sam. I think that was a good overview. I guess the only other thing to reflect on is, we as in any industry, there's probably a mix of kind of quality across the sector. We have where we kind of work with consultants. We obviously have mechanisms in place to procure those to ensure that we have kind of quality suppliers that we're working with, and we provide guidance to local authorities and others in terms of how to structure specifications, how to ask for experience and all that sort of stuff, to try and make sure again that the kind of quality of the service offer generally is kind of moving upwards. And I think possibly more on the efficiency scheme, the GH&F. We're aware that the kind of suppliers that work in it's quite a niche, perhaps, part of the kind of heat network market, but obviously a really, really important one. So we do have sort of ambitions to ensure that the scale of the market offer and the quality of the market offer kind of moves up. So again, it's something we're very aware of, and where we can step in or at least offer guidance to projects, we absolutely do so.
So would I be right in summarising by saying, if you think you should be involved or could be involved, to talk to you about it in the first instance, and then if you have, I guess that follows, isn't it? If you're a consultant or you want to work with a consultant, to talk to you first. As you said earlier, Sam, don't write the application before you've sort of had a conversation about whether you're meeting all the criteria. It's turned into when you got to your information finish at 11:23, I worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but we've done very well, and we've covered a lot of ground. So it only remains for me to ask my final question, which is what I asked to all my panelists, which is what's the one key takeaway that you'd say to the audience around heat networks and heat network funding? I'll ask Sam Hales go first because he's been last so far. We'll go Sam 2, Sam 1, and then Alex to finish off. So what's the one key takeaway that you'd suggest? I'm
liking the numbering system for the Sams as well. It makes life easy. I think sort of the key takeaways, obviously, as we said, if I focus on HNES in particular, is trying to move up those bottom performing heat networks. I think we're working towards that. I think the whole market is, obviously, there's regulation, things like that are coming in. And I think the key takeaway is things like HNES that provide funding really help projects do that ahead of time, basically, and make sure that they're being the best, that they are the best sort of heat network they can be there, supporting customers, things like that, as early as they can, and that they're sorted before regulation basically forces it to get to that standard without the additional help.
Thanks, Sam. Sam 1.
So it won't surprise you that my takeaway is get in touch if you'd like to know anything more about any of the schemes or policies that have been discussed today. And also, please go away and tell your partners, your supply chain, your clients that these funds exist. They're open at the moment, and if we don't use them, then there's a risk that we lose them. So please do shout about them and tell everybody that they exist.
So the money is available and hasn't been spent is the message from you there, Sam.
Well, a lot of it has been spent so far.
Okay, but there's still money available, should I say?
Money available.
Yeah. Okay, and Alex.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks both. So I guess on reflection, there's loads of really interesting, really transformational stuff coming up. Speaking on kind of behalf of the wider Heat Networks team at DESNES. So my takeaway is that we can't sort of develop this policy in isolation. We need feedback from our stakeholders. So whether that's kind of on a consultation or kind of elsewhere, please engage with us. I can share after the call a link to sign up to a newsletter that we have, and that's a really good way of kind of keeping up to date with all the things that our team are involved in and developing and doing across delivery, policy and skills and market transformation and beyond. So yeah, if you could do one thing off the back of this, please sign up and engage with us, and we're really keen to hear views and thoughts on what we're doing and how we're developing these policies.
Great, thank you very much. So thanks once again to all of you for the time that you've given. I think fascinating overview there. And so all it remains for me to say is that the webinar will be available to view for anyone that you want to catch up. And that'll be on the Elemental website. If you're not already, please sign up to our Elemental newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. We have another webinar tomorrow on district heating where we're going to be looking at that very subject of how we reuse waste heat, and we're getting a little bit into the engineering side, but we'll also be talking about the bigger picture. So please do sign up to that, elementaldigital.co.uk. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we will see you again. Goodbye.
Thank you.